Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat sermon by TBA RabbInic intern Nico Losorelli.
Kadosh Tihiyu, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy, is how our Parashat gets its namesake. God tells us to be holy because God is holy. We then get a continuation of what is called the Holiness Code, which is a series of laws that we are to uphold. We get some of our greatest hits and worst hits given and reiterated in Parashat Kedoshim. Similar codes are found in other Near Eastern cultures, but none is as unique as the Holiness Code of Parashat Kedoshim. Holiness, though. Let's start there. It's hard to define, right? What does it mean? Does it mean to fulfill all the mitzvot? But does that really make a person holy? Surely it has to be more than the mechanical nature of action alone. Maybe it's about being thoughtful and being a thoughtful and reflective person in general, but who defines that and how do we measure that? Maybe it's about being completely devoted to God by separating yourself from the world. Well, there is an element of that, yes, but the Torah recognizes that people live lives and that not everyone wants to be a rabbi or a cantor. And if they did, who would be left to be a Jew in the pew? Besides, if this code was only for rabbis, cantors, or kohanim and leviim, why not just provide them with a separate book, and why tell it to everyone? But on that note, to be holy, because God is holy, is a pretty tall order, so one might expect that it's a state of being reserved for specific people, but it's not. Kedoshim Tihiyu. You shall be holy, you all shall be holy, we are all called to be holy. However, it wasn't always that way. It used to be that in some Near Eastern cultures, that laws were given to royalty and to royalty alone. And as such, royalty ended up being the sole lawmakers, shapers, and reality makers. Yet here, the law is given to us all. Thus, Moses being commanded to speak to the whole Israelite community, Vaydaber el kol adat bnei Israel, represents a pretty significant paradigm shift. The verse employs the word edah or adah, meaning a kind of witnessing community, which we are. And it makes us clear that we are all to bear witness to the giving of the law. And it's a majorly democratizing move. Because if we all heard the law together at the same time, then that gives us all a role in knowing the law, implementing the law, and ultimately shaping our reality with the law. Thus, there's less of a chance of the law being changed on a whim like it might be by some despotic king. The laws move from being in the hands of the few to being in the hands of the many. Kings alone are no longer to shape our reality. We as a broader community are to have an active hand in shaping our own reality. It's taking holiness and giving it to the people. Holiness to the people. That's a movement right there. That's a movement we need right now. Okay then. So holiness. It's now in our hands. But being holy is still a state of being and not an action per se. So what action or actions can we take to be holy? Let's explore this question by taking a little side quest into some language facts. Let's look at the Hebrew word kadosh, whose root, the Hebrew word for that being shoresh, is kuf daled shin. And while that shoresh is often translated as holy, we know that biblical Hebrew tends to be what we call word poor, meaning that we only have so many words, and that individual Hebrew words often have to do a lot of heavy lifting. To put this into perspective, there are actually only about 8,600 attested biblical Hebrew words in the Tanakh. So that means you could probably put all those words on a document that's about 4 or 5 pages, and that would be all the words uttered once in the Tanakh in one space. And its cousin, modern Hebrew, it has roughly 80,000 words. And to put that into even greater perspective, while opinions vary wildly on this, the Oxford English Dictionary attests to about 600,000 words in the English language. So given that words in Hebrew often have to do double, triple, and maybe even octuple duty to match the semantic field of English, there ought to be some alternative definitions. Well, other definitions do exist, one of them being to be separated. Okay, finally, an action verb, to be separated. So let's run with this. What if we were to translate Kedoshim Tihiyu ki kadosh ani, you all shall be holy for I am holy, as you all shall separate yourself, for I have separated myself. Now that's something we can work with, and it's a little less nebulous than holy. Separateness. We separate ourselves from the wider community and the wider world in many ways. We have a different way of eating through the laws of kashrut. We have a different way of praying, often in Hebrew and Aramaic, and sometimes we sway when we pray. We even have a different way of telling time with our lunar solar calendar, with our day starting at night. These separations make us distinct from the non-Jewish world, and they also shape our reality. No other people has a weekly marathon on Friday to get everything cleaned, cooked, and sorted. No other people fastidiously checks for every crumb of chametz once a year. And no other people makes such a big deal about blowing a ram's horn. But we do. And what we do, and the form of these mitzvot and minhagim, which separate us, also lends those actions to different functions or outcomes. So let's explore some of those functions and outcomes for just a second. Let's explore what some of our cultural and religious customs do. Keeping kosher. Keeping kosher requires us to have a special awareness of meat and milk and specific animals, and it also consistently puts us in spaces with other Jews, like kosher restaurants and kosher kitchens, and thus necessitates the building of those kosher restaurants and the tending to those kosher kitchens, which is a creation of a kind of physical reality. Praying in and speaking Hebrew and Aramaic, both of which are minority languages, put us in a distinct linguistic reality, and our calendar puts us on a uniquely Jewish rhythm that the world at large doesn't necessarily follow, giving us a kind of unique temporal reality that binds us to one another and shapes our relation to the wider world. Observing mitzvot, which Parashat Kedoshim and the Torah writ large present as the means to be holy or separate, creates different realities and outcomes than not observing mitzvot, which may seem obvious. But to appreciate just how much it does impact our reality, I want to take a step back and think about what it means to move from being less observant to more observant, both of which are realities in their own right. Now, I use scare quotes because I don't want anyone to interpret the words more or less in this context as meaning more or less Jewish, which is important to say because even with some 600,000 words in the English language, our usage of them can sometimes still fall short. So, for the sake of imperfect language, anyone who's gone from being less observant to more observant can attest to that process being a major life and reality shift. Let's take committing to lighting candles at home every Shabbat, for example. That one observance has the potential to have ripple effects throughout many arenas of one's life. Not only does having to prioritize lighting those candles 18 minutes before sundown necessitate low-stakes requirements like having candles and matches in your house, it also necessitates markedly higher-stakes conversations, for example, with one's employer, that you might have to be off of work with enough time to get home to light candles. And this might require that you contemplate telling your employer that you're Jewish, which could come at some personal risk, especially now. Or this may require you to become comfortable with walking out of the office early every Friday while others are still working with their curious eyes on you as you leave early. This observance will shape how you interact with the world and how the world interacts with you, creating a new reality. This, by the way, is not a bad thing, but it does come with costs and benefits. As that same person deepens their observance, let's say they decide they aren't answering emails on Shabbat anymore. In fact, they're going to turn off their phone altogether. Over time, they find that on a certain level they've separated themselves from others. And while this can be challenging, they've actually found themselves entering a greater state of personal holiness by building better boundaries with their employer and by being more conscious about just exactly how and with whom they spend their time. And they've also found themselves at more Shabbat dinners, building community with more like-minded people. They've also likely found themselves contemplating existence and the Kadosh Baruch Hu and their place in it all. And they've found themselves both doing the actions of the mitzvot and being thoughtful and reflective about how that has impacted their reality. In a very real way, this increased observance is empowering in the way that the giving of the Torah to all of the people is. In the spirit of Parashat Kedoshim, we're taking the law from the hands of the king, which in our day might be a world that is constantly demanding that we be productive and available, and we're putting that power back into our own hands, thus giving us the ability to shape our own realities and pursue our own values in a world that often takes more than it gives. I think we might be able to call that process of claiming our autonomy holiness. So, how to be holy? It's still a difficult question to answer. But I'd like to suggest that maybe it starts with the action of doing a mitzvah here, doing a mitzvah there, while at the same time reflecting on what doing that does to us and for us and to the people around us, and seeing how that shapes our reality, and asking whether or not that's a reality that we want to live in, and why. Kedoshim tiyu ki ani kadosh. You shall be separate or holy, for I am separate or holy. Among many things, this is a call simply to this. Be both active and thoughtful in how you shape your reality, for that is the road of holiness. So, be holy and make reality holy, even if it costs you something, perhaps even especially when it costs you something. Because who knows, maybe you stand to gain so much more than you lose.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.